Welcome again, students, to my class of BA Part 1. We are studying Paper 1 and Section A. With this poet, we would be completing the whole of Section A of BA Part 1. In total, we have 7 poets in Section A, which cover the period of transition to the Romantic era. And John Keats is uh, the youngest of the romantic poets. And in this video and two more, we would be completing Keats, and with that we would come to an end of our section A. So let us study and enjoy John Keats's beautiful ode on autumn. So as usual, we need to know a little about the background of the poet John Keats. He was born on 31st of October 1795 and left his physical abode on 23rd February 1821. He was, as I've already referred, one of the main figures of the second generation of Romantic poets, along with Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley, both of whom we have already studied. And he was also recognized as one of the trio of these young Romantic poets, though his works had been in publication only for 4 years before his death, because he died very early as he succumbed to the disease of tuberculosis at the age of 25. So, how early he died, but in a short span of his life, he was able to leave his mark on the history of romantic poetry. And this portrait, which you can see, is a portrait of John Keats, posthumously drawn by William Hilton. And we can see that in National Portrait Gallery in London. And as I've already mentioned, he was born in London and he died in Rome at the age of 25. So, coming to his beautiful poem To Autumn, it also reminds us of the poems by Byron and other romantic poets, where the reference has been to autumn in some way or the other. Ode to the West Wind, Shelley also refers to this west wind which moves about, that is autumn, during the autumn season. So here specific reference is to autumn. So the autumn was composed on 19 September 1819 and published in 1820 in a volume of Keats' poetry that included other poems like Lamia and the Eve of St. Agnes. And To Autumn is the final work in a group of poems known as Keats's 1819 Odes. So, uh, although there were certain problems which Keats was facing in his life, and he had little time to devote to poetry in 1819, still he composed To Autumn after going for a walk near Winchester one autumnal evening. So just like Shelley was also inspired to write his ode to the west wind when he had been moving in a place where he experienced the power of west wind. Similarly, these romantic poets, because they were uh, too much inclined to write about nature, they were inspired by the elements of nature. The work To Autumn makes the end of his poetic career, as he needed to devote himself to the lifestyle of a poet. And a little over a year after the publication of To Autumn, Keats died in Rome because of tuberculosis. So, what kind of a form or what figures of speech are used in the poem? We need to know something about that. So, basically, the poem is divided into three parts, and each has a 11 line stanza which describes a progression through the season of autumn from the late maturation of the crops to the harvest and to the last days of autumn when winter is nearing. So it's a cyclic movement which he captures in his poem. The imagery used in the poem is richly achieved through the personification of autumn, as most romantic poets who personify the elements of nature because they connect to them very deeply, and the description of its bounty, its sights and sounds, which as we just will read, we will know how richly and visual impact is created by the imagery used by Keats. And it has parallels to the work of English landscape artists, with Keats himself describing the fields of stubble that he saw on his walk as conveying the warmth of some pictures. The work has been interpreted as a meditation on death because how slowly from autumn winter approaches and winter reflects the end or the death of the year, as an allegory of artistic creation as well as an expression of nationalist sentiment. So, coming to the theme of the poem Autumn describes in three stanzas the three different aspects of the season. That is how, with the coming up of autumn, fruitfulness becomes very bounty, its labor, what is required when the autumn season come, and its ultimate decline because it leads to winter. Through the stanzas, there is a progression from early autumn to mid autumn and then to the heralding or the coming of winter. Parallel to this, the poem depicts the day turning from morning to afternoon and into dusk. So, these are all parallel symbolic reflections of the cyclic movement of human life or day or the seasons. These progressions are joined with a shift from the tactile sense to that of sight and then of sound, creating a three-part symmetry which is not present in Keats' other odes. So we have been talking about the Yona ode earlier also when we had studied Ode to the West Wind by Shelley. So just to recapitulate some important points of what an ode is. So like a lyric, an ode is also of Greek origin. The subject matter of an ode is serious and dignified, as well as the style and tone is elevated. So both the style and the theme are of a serious note. It may be full of deep and sincere emotion, but its expression is highly elaborate. The most important point of an ode is that it is in the form of an address when you are referring to something very specific, and it is directly addressed to the being or the object it treats of. So, the remarkable thing is also that the opening lines usually contain an apostrophe or an appeal, which we found in Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, which begins as if the persona is calling upon the west wind, which has been personified by saying, "O wild west wind," which is repeatedly used. And Keats' Ode to a Grecian Urn, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness." So, these are some of the important characteristics of an ode. Now, let us study this beautiful ode to autumn. So, you will all recall that Keats wrote this poem, Ode to the Autumn, because autumn uh, acted as Keats's muse. Muse is something which inspires you. To a poet or an artist, he's inspired by something, and that is called a muse. So here, the season autumn becomes a muse for the poet. So the first two lines, they present the main character or the main persona of this poem. So let us read it. Seasons of mist, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. So, who is being referred to as season of mists and mellow fruitfulness? It refers to the season of autumn. So, the main character of this poem is the season autumn, which is being personified. So, as you all must be aware, that autumn season is the time when trees start to shed their leaves, as you had also studied about it in Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, and winter is nearby knocking at the door. In England, autumn season is also referred to as fall. So here we are not talking about the tropical climate that we are used to in India, but we are going to talk about autumn as in England. So autumn actually is a transition between summer and winter. So the mists invite winter and fruitfulness is the last gift of summer. So what does the poet refer the autumn to? If you read again, the poet refers to season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, that is autumn, who is referred to here or personified as a female or as a woman who is a close bosom friend of the maturing sun. So maturing sun is referred to as a personified as a male, and autumn is a dear friend. Bosom friend means dear friend of maturing sun. And what do they both do together? The sun as well as the autumn season, they conspiring with him here refers to the sun. So the autumn conspiring with sun how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run. So here maturing sun, because it is going to say goodbye, because when winter comes the sun rays fall slantingly on that part of the earth, and therefore winter has arrived. So what happens is that uh, the poet calls the fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run. Everything becomes uh, filled with juice. The fruits, the vines that round the thatch eaves run. So thatch eaves refers to the thatched or the straw huts to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. So how autumn along with the sun, they work closely together so that the plants are loaded, the trees and the vines, they are all filled with juices, as well as to swell the gourd, the plum, the hazel shells. So all the fruits are filled to the core with the juice because they have matured, and the sun and the autumn season they combine to fill each fruit with its fullness, with a sweet kernel to set budding more. Not only does the autumn season with sun fill all fruits with juice and bring them to maturity and ripeness so that they are ready for harvest, but at the same time the season also helps to increase the budding, that is the flowers. They also have lots of plants have lots of buds so that they mature into flowers. So many flowers are there, and still more later flowers for the bees. So many flowers that the bees have a feast over these plants, these flowers, because they suck from the nectar, the pollens, which they collect from the flowers, the bees, until they think warm days will never cease. So they enjoy sucking through the flowers, the pollens, the nectar, which they need to make honey, and they keep enjoying that as if the warmth of the sun would never go away. So the bees also they enjoy this season, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy cells. So, the autumn season not only works upon the fruits, the they fill them with the nuts, but also with the flowers which bloom and helps the flowers to grow, and the beehives which overflow with honey, and their cells, that is the honey bees home, they become very sticky because the honey is, because of its sweetness, sticky. So what happens that too much overflowing of honey takes place. So in this first stanza we find that very beautifully and with lot of visual imagery, Keats has described the autumn season by personifying it. So, a lot of symbolism is used, alliteration is used, and as always, the romantic poet do, they personify nature. So, as we move to the next stanza, we'll find how the other aspects of the autumn season would be taken up by Keats. So, we will continue the video and study stanza 2 in the next video. Thank you so much.